How did an Apache leader, facing hunger, violence, and a world closing in, form an alliance with one of the richest ranchers in Arizona territory? The West has always been a land of legends, tales of outlaws, gunfighters, and dusty towns clinging to the edge of survival. But hidden beneath the louder stories is one far more unusual, and far more human. A story the frontier was never prepared to accept. Because this isn't a tale about bullets or bandits. It's a tale about a family that wasn't supposed to exist. It begins with a question that baffled everyone who heard it. How did an Apache leader, facing hunger, violence, and a world closing in, form an alliance with one of the richest ranchers in Arizona territory? And how did that alliance, born out of desperation and hope, evolve into a family that defied every rule the West demanded people live by? For generations, the frontier was a place where cultures clashed more often than they connected. Where survival meant choosing a side, drawing a line, and guarding it with your life. But sometimes fate draws its own lines. And sometimes people step across them. This is the story of a father determined to protect his people, even when the world left him few choices. A rancher who carried the weight of old wounds but refused to let bitterness rule him. And 3 daughters, each with their own fire, their own voice, and their own idea of freedom, who would change the course of 2 communities simply by choosing their own paths. Their lives collided in a way that challenged tradition, angered rivals, and shocked the territory. Yet what grew from that collision wasn't scandal, but something far more powerful. This is the tale of a bond forged in courage, shaped by compassion, and strengthened by love that refused to recognize the boundaries set by others. A family no one expected. A family built where 2 worlds met. And a family that proved, against all odds, that even in the harshest corners of the Wild West, hope can take root. And it all begins here. The story truly begins with a man named Nalin, an Apache elder born in a time when the land still belonged to the people who walked it long before maps carved it into pieces. To outsiders, he was a figure of quiet authority. To his own people, he was the one who carried their hopes when everything else had been taken. For years, Nalin watched his homeland shrink mile by mile. Rivers redirected. Forests cut. Hunting grounds fenced off. Every loss came with a promise. Temporary, harmless, necessary, but the promises never held. By the spring of 1885, even the strongest families in his band felt hunger creeping into their homes. And hunger, he knew, was a foe more dangerous than any cavalry line. Yet Nalin never let despair show on his face. His daughters used to tease him for how calm he always looked. But inside he could feel the storm building. Tension with nearby settlers had reached a boiling point. The territorial governor kept pushing for more Apache land. And traders who once dealt fairly now raised their prices, knowing the tribe had little choice but to pay. Nalin understood something others didn't. Survival wasn't just a matter of bravery. It was a matter of strategy. Around him, younger warriors urged resistance. Older men prayed the government agents would honor the next treaty. Women and children waited for someone, anyone, to lead them toward a future more stable than the one they had now. And Nalin felt the weight of every eye on him. One night, sitting beneath a sky thick with stars his ancestors once mapped by memory, he made a decision that would change not only his family's fate but the destiny of everyone connected to them. He decided that if the world was narrowing, then he would widen his options. If the tribe needed allies, he would find ones worthy of trust. And if he had to break tradition to build a bridge to safety, he would do it, not out of weakness but out of love. Still, for all his wisdom, there was one truth that kept him awake more than any other. His daughters were growing closer to adulthood, and each of them carried a strength that could shape the future of the tribe. Sakya, the eldest, with her sharp mind and steady resolve. Tala, fierce and unbroken, unafraid to challenge any injustice. And Naira, the quiet healer, whose compassion gave hope to even the most weary. Nalin saw in them the possibility of new beginnings. And he also saw the danger they faced if the tribe's situation continued to worsen. The elders counseled caution. The warriors urged resistance. But Nalin believed neither was enough. He needed an ally powerful enough to stand beside his people, not in domination but in partnership. That's when he first heard the name of a man the settlers called the last good rancher, a man who paid fair wages, honored the ground he worked, and refused to join the rising tide of hostility against the Apache. Colton Graves. A rancher wealthy enough to change the balance of power in the territory. A man respected, yet somehow still an outsider, just like Nalin. The Apache father didn't know him, had never even seen him. But something in his instincts sharpened when he heard the tales. A man of land. A man of principles. A man who could become an ally, if approached in the right way. And so the idea took shape, daring, untraditional, controversial. Nalin would extend a hand across a cultural divide that had taken decades to carve. He would propose a union of families, a bond rooted not in conquest but in mutual survival. And he knew such a bond could only be forged through those who mattered most to him, his daughters. He hoped they would understand. He hoped they would choose freely. And above all, he hoped they would forgive him for asking them to step into a world that had rarely shown kindness to their people. This was the burden he carried. And it was only the beginning. While Nalin weighed the fate of his people beneath desert stars, miles away another man stared down a different kind of silence. One shaped by memory, grief, and the heavy cost of building a life on the edge of the frontier. Colton Graves didn't look like the kind of man who carried sorrow. To most who met him, he was the picture of frontier success. A towering ranch that stretched farther than the eye could see, herds of cattle that moved like rivers of muscle across the plains, and the kind of wealth that made his name known in every saloon from Prescott to Tucson. But behind the reputation was a story few understood. Colton had come west after the Civil War, a young medic who had seen too much blood and too little mercy. He wasn't searching for riches back then. He was searching for quiet, a place where the past could loosen its grip. Arizona territory seemed empty enough, wide enough, wild enough to let a man breathe again. Years of work hardened his hands and taught him every sound a wounded animal could make. He learned to tame horses no one else dared approach. He built trust with cowhands who had nothing but their labor to offer. And slowly the Graves Ranch took shape, one fence, one well, one weary sunrise at a time. Yet for all he built, there was one thing he never spoke about, the wife he had buried long before the empire rose. Her loss carved a hollow place in him. Not big enough to break him, but deep enough to change the way he looked at the world. It made him cautious with his heart and generous with the people who crossed his path. Because he knew what it felt like to lose everything, and what it meant to rebuild from nothing. That quiet resilience was why people trusted him. But it was also why he made enemies. Scrupulous men rarely thrive in a land where power is often taken, not earned. Neighboring ranchers grew wealthy by cutting corners, seizing land, or bending the law. Colton refused to join them, and that refusal made him both respected and resented. Still, he held to his principles: pay fair wages, keep your word, and never take what isn't yours. And though that code cost him opportunities, it earned him something far more valuable: loyalty. His crew would ride into fire for him, not out of fear but out of respect. And his ranch became known as a rare haven where workers weren't just hired hands, but part of something steadier than the chaos around them. But even a man of iron values isn't invincible. As tensions with Apache bands increased, many settlers hardened their stance. But Colton saw the truth others refused to admit: the land he worked had been theirs long before he arrived. And if peace was ever going to take root, someone had to show good faith first. Treat them like neighbors, he often said, and maybe they'll become neighbors. It wasn't a popular opinion, but it was one he never wavered from. Still, even he knew peace couldn't be built on good intentions alone. The territory was shifting. Pressure from expansionists grew every month. Powerful men were willing to burn entire communities, native and settler alike, to gain control of the land. And Colton found himself caught in the middle. Too fair for the corrupt. Too independent for the greedy. Too principled for the ruthless. He recognized the storm forming long before most others did. And he understood something many refused to accept: conflict was coming. If the territory kept boiling the way it was, no ranch would be safe, no village untouched. He didn't know Nalin. He didn't know the 3 daughters whose futures were tied to decisions happening miles away. But fate was already arranging the path that would bring them together. One choice from one father. One chance meeting between 2 men. One possibility that could reshape the entire region. Colton didn't yet know the alliance that was about to enter his life, nor how deeply it would change him. But destiny has a way of moving long before we realize we've stepped into its shadow. And soon, the rancher who sought only peace and a quiet existence would find himself walking into the most unexpected chapter of his life. One that would bind him to a family, a people, and a future no one in the West saw coming. By late summer, when the desert heat pressed against the earth like a warning, Nalin made his choice. The elders called it risky. The warriors called it unthinkable. But Nalin called it necessary. He would meet the rancher named Colton Graves, not as an enemy, not as a supplicant, but as a father seeking a future worth fighting for. The journey to Graves Ranch stretched across dry riverbeds and lonely mesas. As Nalin rode, he carried not weapons, but the weight of 3 lives he cherished more than his own. Sakya, Tala, Naira, each daughter with her own future, her own fire. The idea of drawing them into a union with a stranger made his chest tighten with doubt. Yet every mile he traveled hardened his resolve. He wasn't sacrificing them. He was giving them a chance, one the world had denied his people for far too long. Colton knew someone was coming before he knew who. A cloud of dust on the horizon. Riders who moved with quiet precision. But instead of gearing up for conflict, he felt something different. A pull of intuition, the same instinct that had kept him alive through war, storms, and the unpredictable nature of frontier life. When the two men finally stood face to face, there was no handshake, no forced civility. Just silence. And in that silence, something rare happened. Neither man underestimated the other. They saw strength without arrogance. Weariness without surrender. Purpose without pride. Nalin spoke first. Not with demands. Not with rehearsed diplomacy. But with honesty. He told Colton of the land his people were losing, the traders who had turned their backs, the threats whispered by neighboring ranchers who saw opportunity in Apache suffering. And then, with a steadiness that surprised even himself, Nalin revealed what he hoped to build. A bond. A partnership. A joining of families that might reshape the fragile peace between their worlds. Colton listened without interruption. He had expected tensions. He had expected negotiations. What he hadn't expected was the sincerity in Nalin's voice, or the courage it took to come here alone. The idea of a marriage alliance hung between them, heavy with meaning, heavy with consequences. Colton had not thought of marriage in years. The memory of his late wife still lived in the quiet corners of his home, in the gentle regrets he carried like old scars. To consider a new bond now felt like stepping toward a future he had long believed was close to him. Yet he wasn't a man who turned away from responsibility. And he sensed that what Nalin offered wasn't submission or barter, it was partnership and something unexpectedly rare, trust. Still, Colton refused to answer out of impulse or pride. Before any decision is made, he said, I have to meet them. Your daughters must choose for themselves. A family built on pressure won't survive the West. A family built on choice just might. The moment the words left his mouth, Nalin felt something shift. For the first time in months, the weight on his shoulders eased. Colton understood the heart of the matter. He valued consent. He valued integrity. He valued people. That alone set him apart from the men who demanded land without offering respect. And so the two men came to an agreement, not a contract, not a transaction, but an understanding. Nalin would return with his daughters. Colton would listen, observe, and invite them to decide their own paths. In that moment, neither man realized the depth of what they had set in motion. They had opened the door to a bond that defied culture, politics, and the expectations of an entire territory. A bond that would challenge prejudices on both sides, spark outrage in the powerful, and ignite hope in the weary. As the sun dipped below the ridges and painted the desert gold, Nalin rode back toward his people with a sliver of something he had not felt in years. Possibility. And Colton watched the disappearing silhouette of the Apache elder with an uneasiness he couldn't quite name. Not fear. Not regret. Something deeper, something unfamiliar. For the first time since the war, he sensed his life was about to change. Not through violence. Not through ambition. But through something far more unexpected. Family. When Nalin returned to his village, the daughters sensed that something monumental had shifted. Sakya, Tala, and Naira had grown up in a world where the rules were rigid, the dangers relentless, and the choices often cruelly limited. Yet now their father's presence carried a spark of possibility, a whisper that their lives could stretch beyond the boundaries the desert and settlers had imposed. Sakya, the eldest, felt the weight of responsibility more acutely than anyone. Quiet, observant, precise, she understood the fragility of survival. She had seen families torn apart by hunger, by war, by greed. And now the choice before her was more than a personal decision. It was a path to safeguard her people. Could she accept a bond with an outsider? Could she trust a man from another world to honor her family and her heritage? Her mind raced, balancing loyalty, caution, and hope. In Colton Graves, she glimpsed not only a protector but a partner who might respect the wisdom of her people. Tala, the middle daughter, burned with defiance. She had never bowed to tradition or fear. To her this was not a negotiation, it was a test. Could the West's rules bend for justice, or would she simply be another pawn in its endless games? Her spirit bristled at the thought of submission, but curiosity crept in. She wanted to see the man who had earned her father's trust, the man whose reputation spoke of fairness in a world that often knew none. She resolved that no one, not even her father, would choose for her. She would watch, question, challenge, and only then decide. Naira, the youngest, carried a gentler fire. She had always seen the world through compassion, valuing harmony and understanding above conflict. To her, the proposal was not about power or protection, it was about connection. Could two worlds meet without violence? Could family extend beyond the lines drawn by culture or custom? Her heart told her the answer might be yes, but she would need to test it for herself. When the daughters finally met Colton Graves, it was not a moment of spectacle. It was a moment of quiet observation, of measured words, and of instinct speaking louder than any tradition. Colton, with all his strength and experience, spoke not to impress but to invite. He listened without judgment, acknowledged their voices and respected their agency. Each daughter responded differently. Sakya, practical and cautious, saw the security and promise in an alliance that could preserve her people's future. She chose to engage with Colton, to step into a bond not of submission, but of mutual respect and shared purpose. Tala, restless and daring, rejected the idea of marriage, yet she did not reject the opportunity entirely. Instead, she carved her own path, joining the Graves Ranch as a partner in business, a bridge between cultures and a force in her own right. Her choice was a statement: independence and influence could coexist with collaboration. Naira, guided by her empathy and devotion to her community, chose to remain with the tribe. Yet she would frequently visit the ranch, offering her knowledge as a healer, becoming a living connection between two worlds that had long stood apart. In that moment, the unexpected began to take shape. A new family was forming, not dictated by power or obligation but by choice. It was fragile, yes, and vulnerable to judgment, to gossip, to the harshness of the frontier. But it was authentic. It was alive. And it carried the seed of something revolutionary, the idea that love, trust, and loyalty could transcend boundaries, even in the unforgiving landscape of the Wild West. The daughters had chosen. And in their choices they had begun to redefine what family could mean, what survival could look like, what courage truly required. What neither Nalin nor Colton realized yet was that these choices would not only shape the lives of their daughters, but the very future of the land around them. For the first time, possibility felt real. And nothing in the territory would ever look the same. Once the daughters had made their choices, the world around them seemed uncertain, as if it were holding its breath. Yet on the Graves Ranch, something remarkable began to take root, something no law, no custom, and no gossip could contain. It was the slow, steady building of a family unlike any the West had ever seen. Sakya, stepping into her role beside Colton, proved that partnership could be equal, grounded in mutual respect rather than hierarchy. Together, they managed the ranch, negotiated with suppliers, and confronted challenges that would have crushed lesser teams. But their bond was not just practical, it was personal. Each day, each decision, each risk they shared deepened a connection that transcended culture, wealth, and expectation. Tala brought fire and innovation to the operation. Refusing to be confined by traditional roles, she became a bridge between the Apache community and the settlers, negotiating fair trades, mediating disputes, and demonstrating that influence was earned through skill and courage, not inheritance or social approval. She thrived on challenge, and in her success she reshaped the way the ranch, and eventually the wider territory, viewed women in positions of power. Naira, remaining with her people, became the invisible thread that connected the two worlds. Her wisdom as a healer and her gentle guidance built trust between communities that had long viewed one another with suspicion. Her presence reminded everyone involved that family could exist beyond walls and fences, beyond ceremonies or contracts. It could exist in shared purpose, mutual care, and love freely given. Slowly, the Graves Ranch transformed. It was no longer just land, cattle, and profit. It became a haven. A place where cultures met, not as conqueror and conquered but as neighbors, partners, and friends. Where traditions could coexist and evolve. Where children learned Apache stories beside the sound of cowbells and the rhythm of ranch hands at work. The outside world was skeptical, of course. Neighbors whispered. Traders frowned. Even distant authorities questioned the arrangement. Yet the family endured. They endured because their foundation was not built on approval or fear, but on choice, respect, and loyalty. In quiet moments, Colton would watch Sakya riding along the ridges, Tala negotiating fiercely in town, and Naira walking among her people, offering her care freely. And he would feel something he had long thought impossible. Hope that a family could be more than a name on a ledger or a contract on paper. Could be a force, a shield, a model for what the West might one day become. Through shared struggle, laughter, and occasional conflict, the family learned that the boundaries imposed by society could be tested, and sometimes broken, without destroying the bonds they had built. They proved that unity was possible in a world designed for division. That love could be both personal and revolutionary. And in doing so, they set a precedent the territory had never seen, a family defined not by expectation but by intention. Not by blood alone but by courage, trust, and the willingness to embrace difference. The West, vast and unforgiving, often demanded obedience to rules that served power rather than people. Yet here on this ranch, a family thrived that refused to obey those rules blindly. And in their defiance, they discovered something far greater than wealth, status, or survival. They discovered the extraordinary power of chosen family. A new chapter had begun. One forged in respect, tempered by challenge, and bound by the kind of love that refused to be limited by society's expectations. And yet, even as this family grew stronger, the West remained a land full of danger. Those who feared change were already gathering. The test of their unity was far from over. Even the strongest bonds faced storms, and in the West, storms often came in the form of men with ambition, greed, and no regard for the lives of others. The Graves family, extraordinary as it had become, was now visible to a world that preferred conformity, obedience, and tradition. To many their unity was a scandal. To some it was a threat. Neighboring ranchers, once indifferent, now watched with suspicion. They whispered that Colton had gone soft, that the daughter's influence weakened his authority. Others feared that the alliance with the Apache would grant the family an unfair advantage, access to land, water, and knowledge the rest of the territory lacked. Some planned to exploit it. Some planned to destroy it. It began with small acts: fences mysteriously cut, cattle herds driven off at night, supplies delayed or stolen. Then threats appeared, more direct, more pointed. Letters left on the doorstep. Men seen lurking near the edge of the property. Word that expansionist agents and corrupt officials were scheming to seize Apache lands, hoping that fear and intimidation would break the fragile unity. The family felt it even in the quietest moments. Yet they were no longer vulnerable in the way they had been before. The daughters, each strong in her own way, now formed a shield around the ranch and its people. Sakya's strategic mind anticipated attacks, preparing defenses the rivals never saw coming. Tala's courage and cunning allowed her to move through the territory, negotiating alliances, uncovering plots, and outsmarting those who sought to weaken them. Naira, though distant, became a force for diplomacy, carrying messages and tending to injured travelers, reminding both sides that humanity could exist in a world bent on division. Even Colton, hardened by war and years of survival, was tested in ways he had not imagined. He realized that strength alone would not protect them. Wisdom, foresight, and unity would be their greatest weapons. And above all, trust in each other, in the daughters, and in the very idea of chosen family, would determine whether they endured or fell. Then the threat escalated. A rival rancher, driven by envy and fear, attempted to cut off water to both the Apache lands and the Graves Ranch. Without water, life itself would be at stake. Colton and Nalin, once strangers separated by culture, now stood shoulder to shoulder, calling on allies from both communities. Apache warriors rode alongside ranch hands. Plans were made, risks calculated, and a nighttime stand was prepared, not for revenge but for survival. When the confrontation came, it was fierce but precise. Sakya led critical maneuvers that turned the tide. Tala coordinated efforts in town, rallying support and outmaneuvering their opponents. Naira's presence bridged the mistrust between parties, diffusing tension at crucial moments. And Colton, steady and unyielding, held the line, guiding his family and allies through the chaos. In the end, the family emerged stronger. The attempt to divide them failed. Those who had underestimated their unity were forced to reckon with something new, A family that did not rely on fear, oppression, or conformity. A family that thrived on respect, courage, and the bonds they had chosen for themselves. For the first time, the West saw that strength could come not only from guns or wealth, but from love, trust, and an unshakable commitment to one another. Yet even as the dust settled, Colton and Nalin knew the challenges were far from over. Enemies remained, and the world beyond their ranch would never fully accept what they had built. But for the Graves family, the lesson was clear: they were stronger together. And no one, no lawman, no rival, no prejudice, could undo what they had chosen to create. In the unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, their family had become something extraordinary. A family that defied expectation. A family that redefined survival. A family that proved against all odds that love could be a force stronger than fear. The West has always been a land of stories, some told in whispers, some etched in blood, and some written across the horizon in moments of courage. But few stories are as unexpected, as quietly revolutionary as the story of the Graves family. A father who faced impossible choices. Daughters who embraced freedom, strength, and wisdom beyond their years. A rancher who refused to let the harshness of the world harden his heart. Together they built something the West had never seen. A family not defined by tradition, by wealth, or by the expectations of society, but by choice, respect, and love. They proved that survival does not always mean conforming to the rules of others. They proved that courage is not just measured by gunfire or conflict, but by the willingness to stand for what is right, to embrace difference, and to protect those you love. They proved that family, in its truest form, can transcend boundaries, bridge cultures, and withstand the storms that life inevitably brings. The Graves Ranch became more than land and cattle. It became a symbol, a testament to what is possible when hearts and minds come together, when the bonds of trust are stronger than the divisions of fear. The choices of a father, the bravery of daughters, and the integrity of a man who dared to see humanity in others had created a legacy that would ripple far beyond the desert mesas and sun-baked plains. In the unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, where the rules were harsh and life was fragile, the Graves family flourished. And in their story we find a reminder that even in the harshest of times, hope can take root, love can grow, and the courage to build a better world can begin with the choices of just a few. This is more than a story about the past. It is a story for all of us. A story that reminds us that family, in its truest sense, is not given. It is created. And sometimes the families we choose can change the world. A family no one expected. A family that defied convention, bridged worlds, and proved that love knows no boundaries. And in the end, that is the true legacy of the West. The story of the Graves family reminds us that courage, love, and choice can defy even the harshest rules of the world. In a time when survival often meant following the expected path, they chose something different. And in doing so, they built a legacy that still inspires today. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible tales from the Wild West and beyond. And now we want to hear from you. If you were in their shoes, would you have taken the same risks to create a family that defied society, or chosen the safer path? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to read your take on this extraordinary story.